My name is Acadia Iverson, and I was 27 the winter my dad emptied my savings account with a piece of paper I signed when I was 21. I found out at 10 past 6 on a Thursday evening, in the grocery store parking lot in New Marbury, Missouri, with the engine running and a bag of ice going soft on the seat beside me. The balance said zero. $28,400, gone in two cashier's checks, cut at a branch 22 miles south that I had never once walked into. 4 days earlier, my sister had come up short at work, and I had told my dad no. I didn't call him. I didn't text anybody. I sat there and wrote down what I saw on the back of a receipt, because writing things down is what I do for a living. I thought that was the worst they could do to me. The next morning, at 20 minutes to 7, somebody started pounding on my front door, and what they came for wasn't what my dad had taken. It was what he'd told them I took. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is the channel for women who kept the receipts, kept their voices down, and finally stopped signing. If one of these stories ever sounds like something you lived through, that's the whole point. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. I work in title. Worked anyway. Cardwell Abstract and Title sits on the square in New Marbury between a florist and a shop that sells vacuum bags, and there are three of us in it, and it smells like thermal paper and old carpet. What a closing officer does is simple enough to say and hard to do. Before money changes hands on a piece of ground, somebody has to walk the paper backward. Every deed, every mortgage, every lien, every death, and make sure the person selling it actually owns it. I'd been doing that since I was 20. I started answering phones, learned to run an abstract, sat for my license, and by 25 I was running closings by myself. Doreen Quillen owns the place. She's 62, she wears reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she taught me the first thing I ever knew about my own trade. We were in the back room over a file where a man's brother had sold ground that wasn't his, and the man was in the lobby crying about what his brother had promised him at a hospital bed. Doreen tapped the book on the table and said, "The record doesn't argue. It just says what happened." I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. I love the work because it was the only place in my life where a correct number stayed correct. Nobody could talk it into being something else. Somebody could yell at me across that closing table and the book still said book and page and date. And the book won. 7 years I spent finding the mistakes in strangers' family paperwork. I had never once pulled my own. On the 3rd of February, a loan order came in from a bank up in Jackson. $60,000, secured by 160 acres out on County Road 411, and the borrower's name at the top of the request was Delmar Iverson, my father. I want to be clear about what I did next, because later it mattered more than anything else I did that month. I read the header, saw the name, and closed the file. It took me maybe 4 minutes. I walked it over to Doreen's desk, told her it was my dad's ground, wrote a conflict note in the office log with the date and the time, and initialed it. That is the rule, and I have never once broken it. But 4 minutes is long enough to see a screen. Before I closed it, I had already scrolled to the exceptions page, the way your eye goes to a fence post you've walked past 1,000 times, and there was a deed of trust from 1998 sitting on the schedule with no release recorded against it. That's not exotic. Half the old farm ground in this county has some dead paper hanging on it, a note somebody paid off in cash in 1985, and nobody ever bothered to clear. It costs money and a notary and an afternoon to clean up, and people put it off until they need to borrow, and then they call us. So I didn't think about it. I thought about how my father was trying to borrow $60,000 in February, which is the wrong month for a man to be borrowing anything. Doreen looked at the screen for a while. She said, "He'll want to know why it didn't close." I said, "He'll ask me Sunday." Here's what I already knew by then, and what everybody in 3 townships knew by the end of the month. My sister Shelby is 24. For 4 years she'd been the office manager at Prather's Mill Farm Supply, out where the blacktop turns to chip and seal, and Gene Odom, who owns it, thought the sun rose on her. In January, his accountant found a hole, 26 months of voided invoices and cash sales that never made the deposit, and when they added it up, it came to $31,200. Gene didn't call the sheriff. He's 57 and he's known my dad since they were both hauling hay for the same man, and he did what men like that do. He came out to the house, sat at the table, and gave the family until the 13th of February to make him whole. All of it, not part of it. After that, he was taking the file to the prosecutor and it would stop being a family matter. I need you to know where everybody lived, because it matters later. I rented half a duplex on Sycamore Street in New Marbury, 4 blocks off the square, by myself. The home place is 160 acres 14 miles west, out past Prather's Mill on County Road 411, and that's where my dad and Shelby were. And 22 miles south, down in Deering Ferry, there was an aunt. My dad's older sister, Verna. She had a phone number and a house and a job at a vet clinic, and in 17 years I had not heard one person in my family say her name out loud. Sunday the 8th, I drove the 14 miles out for supper like I did most weeks. Pork steaks, green beans out of a jar, the same kitchen table with the burn ring from a skillet in 1997. Shelby didn't eat. My dad waited until the plates were still on the table, which is how I knew he'd planned it, because he doesn't like anybody moving around when he's talking. He said, "I need $25,000 by Friday." Not a loan. He didn't use the word loan and he didn't ask if I had it, because he already knew what I had. He laid it out like arithmetic, in that slow, reasonable voice that has gotten him out of 2 lawsuits and into 3 church committees. Shelby's got nothing. He's got nothing liquid, the ground's tied up, the bank's dragging. I've got a job and no kids and no mortgage. Then he said the thing he has said my whole life, the thing I have heard at funerals and equipment sales and both of my grandparents' estates. Somebody has to hold it together. I didn't yell. I have never once yelled at my father, and I wasn't going to start over a pork steak. I said no, and then I said what I could actually do, because I'm not made of stone, and she's my sister. $4,000, which was real money to me, and I would drive out and sit down with Gene Odom myself, and build him a written payment plan with a promissory note, and a payment schedule, and a filing, and I would run the paperwork for free, and Shelby would be paying that man for 6 years, but she would be paying him. My dad shook his head before I got to the end of it. Gene wants all of it. A plan's not money. I told him what that money was for, out loud, at that table, which is more than I had ever said to any of them about anything, a house on the north end of town. He heard it, and it did not move him 1 inch. And then he looked at me over the table and said the sentence I still hear. "You don't have to give it to us, it's already family money." I need to tell you about the paper, and I need to tell you honestly, because the whole thing turns on it. In June of 2019, I was 21. My mother had died 3 years before that, and left the 3 of us undivided interests in a 12-acre strip along the highway, and the co-op wanted it for a grain leg, and the closing was set for a Thursday when I was in Jefferson City at a title school course I'd paid for myself. Lyle Hatcher, who was everybody's lawyer in this county for 40 years, handed my dad the same form he handed everybody, a Missouri Durable Financial Power of Attorney, statutory form, all the boxes checked including banking, because that's how the form comes. I signed it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night with my bag already in the truck. I read the first page. I did not read the second. Durable means it does not expire. It does not lapse. It does not time out. It does not care that the closing it was signed for happened 7 years ago and took 11 minutes. It lives until you kill it or until you do. I know that now the way I know my own phone number. I read those forms for a living. And here's the part people skip when they tell this story back to me. In September of 2024, when my dad started asking what my balance was and then asked, twice, what all that power of attorney covered, I heard it. I wrote a revocation. I had it notarized at the courthouse. I mailed him a copy certified, and I have the green card with his handwriting on it in a folder. And I carried a copy into the First Cape Regional branch on the square and watched a teller scan it into my customer file. Thursday the 12th, 10 past 6, grocery store lot. I'd stopped for ice because the freezer in the duplex makes it taste like onions. I opened the app to see if my direct deposit had cleared, and the savings line said $0 and 0 cents. And my first thought was that the app was broken, because that is everyone's first thought. I refreshed it. I logged out and logged back in. Then I went into the transaction history, and there were 2 entries dated the 11th. Official check, $25,000. Official check, $3,400. $28,400, which was the whole balance, because the second check was just whatever was left after the first one. Branch, Deering Ferry. 22 miles south, a branch I had never used, a branch where nobody knew my face. That money was 3 years and 8 months. It was every raise, every closing bonus, a truck I didn't replace, and a down payment on a house on the north end of town that I had already driven past more times than I'd admit. And I did not call him. I want you to understand that I have thought about that hour more than any other hour of my life. I went inside and bought a $3 spiral notebook. I sat in my truck in the cold with the dome light on for 40 minutes, and I wrote it all out by hand. Dates, times, dollar amounts, check numbers, the branch, the name of the app screen I was looking at. Then I drove home 4 blocks and slept about 4 hours. That's the part I'd change if I could. Not the money. The 40 minutes I spent being careful instead of being loud. At 6:40 on Friday morning, somebody hit my front door hard enough to move the picture frame in the hall. 3 blows, a pause, 3 more. Then a voice, loud, flat, and absolutely certain of itself. Police! Open the door! I was in a t-shirt and sock feet with a toothbrush in my hand. I want to tell you I was brave. What I actually did was stand in my own hallway for about 4 seconds with my hand flat on the wall, doing the math on which of my people had died. Then I opened it. There were 2 deputies on my little concrete slab of a porch, and a woman behind them in a gray jacket with her badge on a chain, and she said her name was Detective Dana Rusk with the Tillman County Sheriff's Department, and she held up a paper. A search warrant. My laptop, my phone, my bank records, anything containing financial records of Prather's Mill Farm Supply. I read it standing there in the cold with my feet going numb on the concrete, because you always read it. And there in the middle of the block of small type was a phrase I had seen 100 times on other people's files and never once on mine. Stealing by deceit. I didn't argue. I didn't get loud, and I didn't ask if this was a joke. I stepped back, told them where the laptop was, wrote my passcode on the back of an envelope, and stood in the kitchen doorway with my arms crossed while 2 grown men went through the drawer where I keep batteries. The worst part was not the warrant. The worst part was Mrs. Tesh across the street, standing behind her storm door in her housecoat at 10 of 7, watching 2 sheriff's units sit in front of my house with their lights running. Then Detective Rusk turned around in my living room with a folder against her hip and said, "Do you know a man named Gene Odom?" They took me in at 9 that morning, and it wasn't a cell. It was a room with a folding table and a poster about a fishing derby, and that somehow made it worse. Detective Rusk laid it out, and she was not cruel about it, which I have since decided was the only decent thing that happened to me that day. The shortage at Prather's Mill was $31,200. On Friday morning, before the sun was all the way up, my father had walked into that store and handed Gene Odom a cashier's check for $25,000, and Gene had signed a receipt for it. That left $6,200 unaccounted for. And in the calendar year 2025, $6,200 had moved out of Shelby's account and into mine in 9 deposits, some of them the same week she'd have been running the store's cash. I knew exactly what that money was. In the fall of 2024, I loaned her $6,200 for a used Equinox after her transmission went out, and she paid me back over 11 months. And I have the schedule I wrote for her, because I write schedules for everything. There was more. My signature was on 2 of Gene Odom's deposit slips, from the 2 Decembers I'd driven out on a Saturday and reconciled his year-end payroll as a favor, because he asked and because Shelby said she couldn't get it to balance. Every single one of those facts was true. My father did not invent one thing. He just put true things in a different order and handed them to a man who was already angry and let the order do the work. I asked for a lawyer and stopped talking, the way I have told 40 strangers to do across a closing table. It was 9:40. I had to call Doreen. Doreen didn't ask me if I did it. I want that on the record because in 3 weeks she was the only person in Tillman County who didn't ask. She listened, and then she was quiet long enough that I could hear the copier warming up behind her, and then she told me the truth in the fewest words she could find. An escrow officer who is the subject of an open fraud investigation cannot hold a file. Not because Doreen thinks anything, because Continental Guarantee underwrites every policy we issue, and their manual says she has to report it within 72 hours and pull me off everything until it closes. Unpaid. Nobody was punishing me. There was no meeting, no vote, no man in an office deciding I was guilty. There was a paragraph in a manual written by somebody in Omaha who will never know my name, and the paragraph did it. I drove to the office at 4:30 that afternoon, when the square was empty and I turned in my key, my fob, and my escrow signature card. I signed the transfer receipt in my best hand, the slow, careful one I use on deeds, because it was the last thing that morning I got to control. Doreen watched me do it. She took her glasses off and she said, "I'm not the one deciding this, honey. That's the worst part of it." I said, "I know," and I meant it, and I have never been angrier at anything in my life than I was at that paragraph. $47,000 a year, gone at 9:40 in the morning by a rule nobody in the building wrote. Rent was due on the 1st. Monday morning I sat down with a lawyer. Nolan Petrie has an office over the old shoe store and charges $225 an hour and does not soften anything, which is exactly what I needed and not at all what I wanted. He read the power of attorney out loud, line by line, and I sat there and listened to my own signature get explained to me. On its face, he said, "This authorizes him. General banking. No expiration. No limits written in." He asked if I'd revoked it. I put the notarized revocation and the green card on his desk. He looked at it a long time and then he asked the question that ended my week. Did the bank have actual notice? Because in Missouri, a financial institution that accepts a power of attorney in good faith, without actual knowledge that it's been revoked, is protected. Not the agent. The bank. The bank is fine. The agent is the one with the fiduciary duty, and the agent is my father. And the prosecutor in this county is not going to file on a man who walked in with a notarized document his daughter signed over a family money dispute in a farm year like this one. Civil suit, then. Petrie ran it for me on a legal pad. $15,000 in fees, minimum, 2 years. And at the end of it, a judgment against a man with no cash and 160 acres already pledged to a bank that wouldn't lend on it. He put the pen down. "You can be right and still be broke," he said. "Those are two different files." I said, "Then why did the loan die?" And he looked up at me over his glasses like I'd said something interesting. That same afternoon, I drove the 22 miles down to Deering Ferry to find out how it happened, because I could not sleep until I knew. The branch manager was about 30 and very kind and completely unable to help me, and it took her 20 minutes and 2 phone calls to explain it. Meridian Valley Bank bought First Cape Regional in January. The core conversion finished on the 9th of February. Everything mapped over. Balances, signature cards, direct deposits, the whole ledger. What did not map over was the imaging system, where the new Marbury branch had scanned my revocation into my customer file in September of 2024. Because the old branch used one vendor and the new bank uses another, and documents in the legacy queue were archived, not migrated. On the 11th, my father walked into that lobby, 22 miles from anybody who knew what I looked like, and set a notarized durable power of attorney on the counter. The banker checked the notary seal. She checked his driver's license. She pulled up an account that showed no restriction of any kind, because on that screen there was none, and she cut 2 checks and did nothing wrong. I put my certified mail receipt on her desk, with my father's handwriting on it, and it meant absolutely nothing. And she was sorry. And she was right to be. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from him. 11 seconds. He said, "Call me when you're done being dramatic. Somebody has to hold it together. I'm going to stop for a second because this is what I wish somebody had told me at 21. A durable power of attorney does not expire. Revoking it only counts if the notice actually reaches the bank, and banks change hands. If you signed one for a parent, go check tonight. Then come back and subscribe if this is helping. Shelby called Monday night from the home place. She cried first, hard, the way she has cried since she was 6 and broke the storm door. And for about 90 seconds I was her sister, and nothing else. I told her it was going to be all right. I told her people survive this. And then her voice changed into a flatter one, a rehearsed one, and she said the thing she called to say. Just tell them it was you. You don't have kids, Katie. You've got no record. They'll give you probation and it'll be over in a month, and Daddy says it's the fastest way to end this for everybody. I stood in my kitchen with my hand on the counter, and I asked her one question. I asked if she told them the 6,200 was mine. She didn't say no. She didn't say anything at all for about 3 seconds. And 3 seconds is a very long time on a telephone, and that was the answer. Here's what I want you to understand about my sister, because I have had a year to think about it and I am not interested in making her a monster. She wasn't being cruel. She was drowning, and somebody she trusted had handed her a board and told her to hold on, and the board was me. Every word she said on that call was my father's word order. I could hear him in the room behind her. I said, "I love you," and I hung up. And then I stood in that kitchen a long time with the light off. That was the night I stopped counting on anybody coming to get me. New Marbury has 2,900 people in it and one grocery store, and I found out that week exactly how fast a number like $31,200 travels. At the gas station, a woman I have known since Sunday school looked at the pump instead of at me. A man I had closed a farm sale for in October stopped me outside the post office and asked me, straight out, in daylight, if it was true I'd been taking from Jean. Not was it true I was accused. Was it true? I said no. He said, well, and got in his truck. That's how it goes here. Nobody yells at you. They just stop needing anything from you. I sat down that Tuesday night and did what I do, which is take inventory. $310 in checking. A pickup with 190,000 miles on it and a slow leak in the right rear. Rent due on the 1st. No job, no reference I could use without explaining, and no other title company in Tillman County, because there isn't one. There's just us. Savings. 0. The word looked so plain on the screen. I had done every single thing right. I had read the forms, kept the schedule, mailed the notice, saved the receipt, and made my careful little handwritten timeline in a $3 notebook, and all of it together was worth about as much as the notebook. I sat there and let that be true for a while. And then I thought about the one thing I still knew how to do that nobody could suspend, revoke, or take out of my hands. I know how to pull a record. There was a drawer in this county that nobody in my family had ever opened. The Recorder of Deeds for Tillman County is in the basement of the courthouse, down a set of stairs with a rubber tread worn through in the middle, past the boiler room. There's a counter of quarter-sawn oak with a brass rail along the front edge, so shined in the middle from elbows that the finish is gone. It smells like dust and book glue and the coffee they keep on a hot plate. I had walked in that back door 200 times in 7 years and never once stood on the public side of that counter. Wednesday morning, I stood on the public side. I filled out a search request slip with a golf pencil like anybody, and when I asked for copies, the clerk turned the little sign around so I could see it, the one in that says $2 per page, and I paid her out of my own billfold. That is the part I remember most, if you want to know. $2 a page, in the county where I had a key to the back door. I pulled the grantor-grantee index under Iverson and went backward. 1998 came up fast. Book 214, page 88. A warranty deed, Orrin Iverson to Delmar Iverson, dated the 2nd of March, 1998. 160 acres. The home place. The ground I learned to drive on. And on the very next page in that same book, filed 11 minutes later by the stamp, a deed of trust. Same date, same tract, same 2 men, securing a promissory note in the amount of $140,000 at 7%, with the whole balance due the 1st of March, 2006. My grandfather did not give my father that farm, he sold it to him and carried the paper himself. And in 28 years, nobody had ever recorded a release. I stood at that counter with my coat still buttoned and read it 3 times. It wasn't a win. I knew that even then, standing there. It was an address. A deed of trust is only worth something to whoever holds the note it secures, and my grandfather had been dead since 2009. So I went up 2 floors to the circuit clerk's office and asked for the probate file, which is also public, which is a thing almost nobody knows. Estate of Orrin Iverson opened in the spring of 2009. 3 pages, typed on a machine, witnessed by 2 women who both worked at the bank. There was nothing clever in it. There was no clause that punished anybody. No condition, no trigger, no sentence that reached out of the grave and moved anything by itself. My grandfather left the farm equipment to my father, because my father farmed. He left the household goods and a certificate of deposit to be split, and in the residuary paragraph, in the driest language a man can use, he left all promissory notes and obligations owed to him at his death to his daughter, Verna. That's all it was. He'd sold the ground to his son and given the paper to his daughter because she wasn't getting any ground, and he thought that made it even. It probably did, on the day he wrote it. I sat on a bench in that hallway with the copies in my lap, and understood exactly where I stood. There was an instrument out there with real teeth in it, recorded, indexed, sitting in plain sight in a public book for anybody with $2. And it did not belong to me. It belonged to a 66-year-old woman, 22 miles south, whose name my family had not spoken since I was 10 years old. I had the paper. I did not have the person. Verna Dunlap lives on a corner lot in Deering Ferry with a chain-link fence and a bird feeder made out of a coffee can. She opened the door before I knocked, looked at me for a second, and said, "You got your mother's jaw? Come in." She was not surprised to see me. She poured coffee that had been on since morning, and we sat at her table, and before I could get the whole question out, she was already nodding. So here is what happened in 2009, in her words, at her kitchen table, 17 years late. At my grandfather's funeral dinner in the fellowship hall, with maybe 40 people eating ham, Verna asked her brother one question. She asked whether he'd ever made a payment on Daddy's note. That's it. That's the whole crime. And my father set his plate down and said, loud enough for the room, that his sister was standing in a church basement on the day they buried their father trying to take the farm out from under him. Nobody asked her a follow-up. Nobody asked to see anything. By Christmas she was off the list, and it stayed that way for 17 years, and my aunt did not fight it because there was nothing to fight. There was just a room full of people who had already decided. She turned her cup around on the table and said it plain. Nobody ever asked to see the paper. Then she got up, went to the back bedroom and came out with a Christmas tin. Inside it was the original note, folded in thirds, with a rubber band that had gone to powder. Under it was a personal property tax receipt from 1994 and a baby tooth in a twist of tissue paper. I asked her for it. She put her cup down. She said no. Not right away, and not unkindly, and not because she was afraid of my father, which was the only reason I had prepared an argument for. She said it because she knew exactly what that piece of paper does, and I did not. She'd had 17 years alone with it to find out. She told me she'd had it appraised twice in her mind and put it back in the tin both times, and that she wasn't keeping it out of loyalty to Delmar. She was keeping it out of some idea that as long as she never used it, the family was still a thing that could be repaired. Then she said the sentence I have thought about every week since. This isn't a card you play, honey. It's a door you walk through, and it locks behind you. I told her I'd already lost my job. She said, "That's not the same, and you know it. You can get another job in another county." I said I'd lost my name in this one. She said, "Names come back around." And then she looked at me the way you look at somebody's kid, and she said, "If I sign that and you file it, you will not be his daughter anymore. Not him. You. That's the price. And it isn't mine to spend." I drove the 22 miles back north with nothing but a cold cup of her coffee in the holder. I got home a little after 9. And at 10 o'clock, sitting on the floor with the copies spread out because my table wasn't big enough, I looked at the maturity date I had already read twice at that counter and finally did the arithmetic on it. I was in Patrice's office at 8 the next morning with the copies, and he gave me 20 minutes for free, which for him is an act of charity. I asked him one question. How long does a deed of trust stay good? He pulled a book down without getting out of his chair. In Missouri, the right to enforce a lien under a deed of trust runs out 20 years after the date the debt matured, unless somebody files to extend it, and nobody ever files to extend it, because nobody ever remembers. He put his finger on the page and looked at me. What's your maturity date? I said. The 1st of March, 2006. He did the same arithmetic I'd done on my living room floor at 10 o'clock the night before, and he said it out loud so it would be real for both of us. Then that lien is dead on the 1st of March, 2026. And this is the 20th. So you have 9 days. Then he told me the second thing, and he told it to me gently, which is not his way. So I knew it was bad. If I took an assignment of a lien on a tract where my own office had an open title order, I would have to disclose it in writing to Continental Guarantee and to Doreen. And there was no version of that where I still had a job when it was over. Not suspended. Gone. And gone in a way that follows you in a business this small. I sat there and heard myself laugh once, with no humor in it at all. The paper and my job have the same expiration date, I said. He didn't argue. I asked him what the payoff was. That night, I cleared the kitchen table and did the one thing I am genuinely good at. I laid out the note, the deed of trust, and the legal description, and I read them the way I would read them for a stranger who was paying me. $140,000 in principal, which in 1998 was $875 an acre, and about right for hill ground with 40 acres of timber on it. 7%. Interest due every March. My father made those payments for 7 years, and then my grandfather had his first stroke, and the payment stopped, and the balloon came due on the 1st of March, 2006, and nobody said a word about it, and my grandfather died 3 years later without ever sending his son a demand letter. Principal and 20 years of interest at 7% came to $336,000. The last appraisal on the ground, the one the bank in Jackson ordered before the loan died, put 160 acres at $350,000. I sat with those two numbers a long time. It's a strange feeling, doing a payoff calculation on your own father. I have run that same math maybe 400 times for people I don't know, and it has never once meant anything to me except a wire amount, and now it was sitting on my table looking like the rest of my life. Doreen's sentence came back to me, and it did not sound like comfort anymore. It sounded like a loaded thing on a shelf. The record doesn't argue. No, it doesn't. That's what makes it dangerous. He came to the duplex on Sunday afternoon with an envelope. Not angry. He never comes in angry. That's not the tool he uses. He wiped his boots, said the porch light was out, went into my kitchen and started my coffee maker like it was his own house, and then sat down across from me and slid the envelope over. 2 documents. The first was an affidavit, typed, 3 paragraphs, saying that the $6,200 deposited into my account during 2025 was a gift from me to my sister, and that I had no interest in any funds of Prather's Mill Farm Supply. The second was a new power of attorney. He explained the trade without ever calling it a trade. If I signed the affidavit, he would go to Gina Odom and clear it up, and he'd sit down with Detective Rusk and say he'd been confused about the dates, and the whole thing would be closed inside a week. Continental would close their file. Doreen would have me back at my desk on a Monday. He did not raise his voice one time. He said it the way you'd offer somebody a ride in the rain. And he wasn't lying either. That's the part I want to be honest about. He could have done it. He had built the whole thing out of true things, and he could have taken it apart the same way, in an afternoon, with 2 phone calls. I looked at the second document, the new power of attorney, and I understood the price. I said, "Let me read it." And my father smiled, because that's what I always say. I sat at that table for 2 hours after he left. I want to be truthful about those 2 hours, because if I tell you I never considered it, you'll stop believing anything else I say. I wrote out what signing gave back, in a column on the back of the envelope, because that's how I think. My job. 47,000 a year and the only closing desk in the county. Rent on the first. My name. At the gas station and outside the post office. Sunday supper. A father. I wrote all of it down, and the column was long, and everything on it was real, and every bit of it was mine again by Tuesday if I picked up the pen. Then I read the affidavit one more time, slower, the way I read a stranger's file. A gift from me to my sister. Not a loan repaid. A gift. And under that, a power of attorney. Fresh. Undated. Waiting for a notary. I had spent 7 years explaining to people at a closing table that a document does not care what anybody meant. It only says what it says. Forever. To everyone who ever pulls it. And what those 2 pages said, permanently, in my own handwriting, was that money that came out of my account had always been theirs to move. That was the whole family in 2 sentences. I stood up. I folded both documents in half, walked out on the porch in the dark, and set them on the rail for him to pick up. And I did not sign either one. If you've ever sat at a kitchen table with a pen in your hand and everybody waiting on you, you already know how long 2 hours is. Tell me in the comments what your family asked you to sign. I read them. And stay with me, because these next 9 days are the reason I'm telling you any of this. Monday I built a file because that is the only weapon I have ever owned, not a diary, not a recording. I never recorded a soul in this entire story, and I want that said plainly, because I don't believe in it and because in this state you don't need it. Other people's records. That's all it was. And other people's records are the only kind that hold. I had asked Meridian Valley for the full transaction log in writing the day I was down there, and it came in Monday's mail. I got copies of both cashier's checks, front and back, with the endorsements on them. $25,000 to Jean Odom, deposited the 13th, and $3,400 to the Tillman County collector, which is when I learned my father had been 2 years behind on the taxes for the home place and had told nobody. I had the certified mail receipt with his handwriting. I had the merger notice from the bank, the one I'd filed in a drawer in January without reading, which now proved the date the imaging system changed hands. I had my 2025 statements showing 9 deposits from Shelby totaling $6,200, and I had the payment schedule I'd written for her in 2024 in my own hand, with her initials on the bottom of it. They had imaged my laptop and my current phone in February and given both back inside a week, and neither one went back far enough to matter. What did was the old phone in my junk drawer with a cracked corner and a dead battery. I charged it overnight, and there were the texts where Shelby asked me for the car money and where she thanked me, twice. I put those pages in last, not because I was saving the best, because I knew exactly what that stack of paper did to my sister, and I wanted to be looking straight at it when I decided. I went back to Deering Ferry on the 25th, and I did not ask her for anything. I set the file on her kitchen table, turned it around so it faced her, and I read her the invoice. Not what I would get, what it would cost. I told her I had already written the disclosure letter to Continental Guarantee and my resignation, and that I would hand both to Doreen before I filed anything, because that's the order it has to happen in. I told her there is one title company in this county, and I would never work in it again, and that at 27, I would be starting over at whatever the courthouse pays. I told her the file on her table clears me and charges Shelby in the same envelope on the same day, and that I had counted the pages knowing it. And I told her that when it was finished my father would tell it his way at the co-op, and enough people would believe him that I'd be living in that version of myself for the rest of my life in this county. Then I stopped talking. My aunt sat there with her hands flat on either side of that file for a long while, and she asked me a question that I could not answer, and I have not fully answered it yet. She said, "Who taught you that being right was the same as being safe?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I had built my entire life on the idea that if my paperwork was clean, nothing could reach me. And a woman in a house dress had just taken it apart with one question. She saw it land. She got up and went to the back bedroom for the tin, and she didn't say yes. She said, "Be at the bank at 9. The 26th of February, 9 in the morning, in the lobby of a bank in Deering Ferry, in front of a notary named Tammy who was eating a granola bar. Petrie had drawn it the night before and charged me for it, and I paid him with a credit card I had been keeping empty on purpose since I was 23. An assignment of note and deed of trust. 2 pages. It says that Verna Dunlap, for value received, transfers to Acadia Iverson all of her right, title, and interest in one promissory note, dated the 2nd of March, 1998, together with the deed of trust securing it, recorded in Book 214 at page 88 of the records of Tillman County, Missouri. My aunt signed it with a bank pen on a chain. She did not want $1. Petrie had put a recital in for consideration, and she looked at me over it and said, "Put 10 in there, and don't hand it to me." She wanted exactly one thing, and she made me stand there and agree to it before Tammy stamped the page. "Don't do it quiet," she said. Quiet is how it lasted this long. Then she sat back down in the plastic chair in the lobby with her purse on her knees, and after a minute she said something that I don't think she meant for me. 17 years I thought I was keeping the peace. I was just keeping the paper. We walked out to the parking lot and she hugged me hard enough to hurt and told me to eat something. I had until Sunday. I drove the 22 miles back north, sat down at that same kitchen table, and typed 2 letters I was never going to be able to take back. Friday, the 27th of February. I got to the square at 20 till 9, and I did the expensive part first, on purpose, before I had one single thing to show for it. I put 2 pages on Doreen's desk. The first was a written disclosure to Continental Guarantee stating that I had taken an assignment of a note and deed of trust encumbering a tract on which Cardwell abstract and title had an open order, identifying the order number, the book and page, and the date I first saw the file, and stating that I had recused myself from that file within 4 minutes on the 3rd of February, and logged it. The second was my resignation, effective immediately. Doreen read both of them twice. She's a careful reader. That's where I learned it. She did not tell me not to. She did not tell me I was throwing away 7 years, although I was. She picked up her pen, signed the receipt for the disclosure, wrote the date and the time in the margin the way she taught me, and slid a copy back across for my file. Then she said, "You know there's not another title company in this county." I said, "Yes, ma'am." I put that part in the letter, too. She almost laughed. She opened her drawer and handed me an envelope, and inside it was a reference letter on our letterhead, dated the Monday before, which means she had written it the week I was suspended and had been carrying it around in a drawer waiting to see what I'd do. It didn't save me. It wasn't meant to. It was just a woman telling me she knew exactly what I was, in writing, where it would keep. It was 8:52 when I came out on the sidewalk. The courthouse opened at 9. At 9:14 in the morning, I stood at the oak counter in the basement of the Tillman County Courthouse and handed over a 2-page assignment of note and deed of trust. Same counter. Same brass rail worn white in the middle. Same $2 sign turned toward the public side. The clerk that morning was a woman named Peg, who has worked down there since before I was born, and she took my pages, checked the notary block, told me what I owed her, and took my money. Then she put the first page under the stamp and pressed it, and the machine made that one dry sound it makes. And there is no sound in my life I remember more clearly than that. She wrote it into the index under Iverson. Grantor, Dunlap. Grantee, Iverson. Book and page. And that was it. Nobody clapped. There was an old man behind me in a Carhartt coat waiting to look at a plat, and he shifted his feet because I was taking too long. What I was doing was standing there, watching the ink go dull, because I know what that stamp means better than almost anybody in that building. Once an instrument goes into that book, it never comes back out. You can file another paper saying the first one was released, satisfied, corrected, or rescinded. And that paper goes in the book too, right behind it. And the original still sits there forever for anybody who ever pulls the page. There is no eraser in the whole system. That is the entire point of it. Before 914, I was Delmar Iverson's daughter who was having some trouble. After 914, I was the holder of the paper on his ground, in print, in the public index, in a county where half the people I grew up with would eventually go look it up. And standing there with my coat over my arm, I finally understood that I had been on the wrong side of that counter for 7 years. Petrie's office at 10:30. This is the part where people expect me to say I called my father, and I didn't. I never called him. I didn't send a message. I didn't drive out there. I didn't ask for a meeting. And I have been asked about that more than anything else. Here's why. Every single thing that man has ever taken, he took in a room with the door shut, at a kitchen table, in a lobby 22 miles from anybody who knew my face, with a story told to somebody who wasn't going to go check. Quiet is the only place he works, so I did it in the loudest room in the county, which is the one with the books in it. We signed an appointment of successor trustee, and Petrie sent the notice of trustees sale down to the New Marbury Register Press for first publication. 4 weeks. Legal notices, page 11, where every farmer in 3 counties reads them with his coffee, whether he admits it or not. The sale was set for the east steps of the courthouse at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of March. We commenced on the 27th of February. 2 days before that lien turned 20 years old and died of nothing but time. Petrie capped his pen and said, "Once this runs, everybody in 3 counties knows." He said it like a warning. I thought about my aunt sitting in a plastic chair in a bank lobby with her purse on her knees, telling me quiet is how it lasted this long. I said, "Good." Then I walked back to my truck, sat in it for a minute with my hands on the wheel, and drove over to the sheriff's department to do the thing I had been putting off since Sunday. 1:20, Detective Rusk's office, a chair with a wobble in it and a window unit that hadn't run since October. I set the file on her desk and I told her what was in it and where every page came from. In order, the way you walk somebody through a title commitment, the bank log, the 2 checks with the endorsements, the collector's receipt for the delinquent taxes, the certified mail card, the merger notice, and then the last section. And I did not look away while she read it. The 2025 statements showing 9 deposits from Shelby totaling $6,200, the payment schedule in my handwriting with my sister's initials at the bottom, and the texts where she asked me for the car money and thanked me for it. Rusk read that section twice. Then she took her reading glasses off and looked at me for what felt like a while, and she asked the only question a decent person could ask. "You understand what this does to your sister?" I said yes. She asked if I wanted to think about it overnight. And I heard myself say the sentence a 62-year-old woman taught me in a back room over a coffee-stained abstract when I was 20 years old, and it did not come out of my mouth the way it went into my ears. I said, "The record doesn't argue." Then I got up and walked out and sat in the parking lot of the Tillman County Sheriff's Department for 20 minutes without starting my truck, because I had just